Hey guys, what's going on? I am Tim Burzens from Amplified Vitality, and in today's video I want to talk about a much anticipated topic, something that you guys have been asking for a long time now. I've really wanted to gather my thoughts on it so I could give a really good video for you. And that is a topic on weight loss, specifically weight loss within the bioenergetic model of nutrition. So the bioenergetic model, just to catch anyone up who is not familiar, is the model that says that the quality and the integrity of an organism is going to be based on its ability to produce energy and its methods of producing energy. And when we really look all the way back to, say, the most simple form of an anaerobe, the bacterial anaerobe that only produces energy through the glycolytic metabolism, it cannot perform the complex functions that the human being can perform, which is also the more of the complex functions that even animals can perform. Those complex functions require a higher energy output, which can only be fueled by the respiratory metabolism. So when these animals, these highly complex animals like humans, get stressed out, the metabolic rate pushes towards that less evolved form and the complex functions shut down. So when those complex functions shut down, that means the things that make life good, the ability to have energy and clear thinking and intelligence and abstract thinking, sexual function, muscle gain, and of course included in that is fat loss. Because fat, if you really want to think about it, is your body's buffer against the stress of environment. Your body holds on to fat because it doesn't know if you might go through another famine. And if you go through a famine, it needs fuel, it needs that backup. But there's a lot of other varying factors here that it's not just about energy. Fat is an energetic molecule. You can burn it for fuel when you need it. But there's a lot of other things going on here, these systems that work within the body to regulate how much energy you're actually going to be producing. Because when you're producing too much energy in an environment when there's not enough fuel and not enough food to supply that energy, then that too long of that time and you would completely run out of your resources and you would die. So the organism has adapted in certain ways in order to maintain survival for the longest time. And the ability to burn fat and the ability for fat to signal that the body should decrease metabolism, which is what happens when we see that fat has less carbon dioxide production. It starts to dissolve the mitochondria in the cell because the free fatty acids have a soap-like structure to them. When we see things like this, we start to understand from that broader perspective how nutrition can play into weight loss in a much newer context, in a way that we can actually create a situation where you can stay lean and you can stay healthy, where you don't have to constantly ramp up fat burning using adrenaline and the catecholamines, which are all stress hormones that are produced when there's not enough carbohydrate. So for a long time, we've kind of run into this question of, if you're going to be lean, you're going to just continually have these high stress hormones all the time, or you're just going to stay fat and be fat and healthy. But there is a better way. There is a higher way to do this. And the bioenergetic model of nutrition affords us the ability to actually see what that new model is. So taking all of that into account, it becomes very clear that in order to stay healthy, in order to keep our metabolisms running efficiently and productively the way that they're supposed to, and in order to keep all those complex functions occurring within the human body, we really want to be consuming adequate carbohydrate. Adequate carbohydrate will vary from person to person, but the idea being that if you're not burning carbs with the respiratory metabolism, then you're going to either be switching into the fat metabolism, which slows your metabolism, or you're going to be inefficiently burning carbs with just the glycolytic metabolism, which has byproducts like lactic acid. You produce a lot of carbohydrate through protein breakdown, which means that you're producing a lot more ammonia in order to produce glucose from an amino acid, a process called gluconeogenesis. So we don't want to be producing these metabolic break byproducts like lactic acid and ammonia, and even endotoxin from the large intestine. We want to be avoiding those things that put a brake on our energy output, the charge of our energy battery, if you want to think about it that way. And we want to be enhancing the things that produce more and more energy. Because if you think about the human body and all of its cells as batteries, then when we are in the highly charged state, that's when we're healthy. That's when we're able to adapt to the environment. If the environment has some stressor that requires a certain amount of fuel, well, our charged battery has plenty of energy to handle that. And we're also not even worried about running out of energy because we're so charged. But if you can only charge to 50% because you have these brakes on your system, then whenever some stress comes into your life, you're A, going to be having a much harder time to meet that stress, and B, your body's going to start to reserve and grab onto the energy that it can and start to shut down those complex functions because it knows it doesn't have as much energy on reserve. When your cells are full and able to produce that energy, then we're in that healthy state, and that's what we want. So of course, the question then becomes, even if you get all of that idea and you understand the bioenergetic model, you understand that you want to be burning carbohydrates, you want to be producing energy from the respiratory metabolism, creating CO2, and that fat burning is bad. Well, now the question becomes, how do you lose weight? How do you lose the extra fat that you have carried on your body? Because most models of fat loss currently are around lipolysis, which is breaking down the fat molecules stored as triglycerides in your adipose tissue into free fatty acids into the blood so they can be taken to the cells and they can be burned off for energy. That's the basic way that we think about it right now. The problem with that, as we said already, is that it slows your metabolism, but it also impairs your ability to use carbohydrates. So there's a process that's well documented, although many fat loss experts, quote unquote, will not actually talk about it, called the Randle cycle. And that Randle cycle states that free fatty acids will compete with glucose for entry into the cell. So what that means is that if you have high free fatty acids floating through your blood and you eat a high glucose meal, well, now the glucose and the free fatty acids are competing for entry into the cell. Glucose can go into cells by itself without the action of insulin, but when glucose remains too high in the blood for too long, the body uses insulin as a signaler to push it into the cells because the bloodstream must maintain certain qualities, certain quantities of nutrients in order to keep the organism functioning. We can put these things in cells. We can put, for example, if you want to think about this like toxins, if you have too many toxins of some sort in your bloodstream and your liver can't handle it, well, we're going to push those toxins into places where they're not going to do harm. They're not really helpful, and they're going to still, be sitting in our body, but they're not floating in the bloodstream and having all those negative consequences. So if we can push them into cells, then we can wait for a time when maybe our liver can handle it more and let them back out. Well, it's sort of like that with carbohydrate, not to compare it to a toxin, but in the same way, you don't want too much carbohydrate in your blood. So if your carbohydrate are not naturally diffusing into the cells because they're being competed with by free fatty acids, insulin will raise to try to push them in. The problem is if we have adrenaline, the catecholamines constantly keeping the free fatty acids high, then that means that those free fatty acids will continually block the glucose even when insulin is raised to try to push it in. So now that's where we get insulin resistance and diabetes. And I briefly talked about a diet that we can use to reverse insulin resistance on a previous video, and you can check that out on my channel. So with all that, we can see that lipolysis through the stress hormones, through the action of the stress hormones, is very counterproductive to our complex functioning of our system, and definitely not in alignment with the bioenergetic model that we talk about here. So how do you lose that fat then if you can't actually burn it into lipolysis? And the answer is through the action of the lipoproteins. So lipoproteins you've probably heard of with blood markers, and especially blood markers for cardiovascular disease and cholesterol. These are the LDL, low density lipoproteins, or HDL, high density lipoproteins. So these are basically shells of proteins that allow the fat that is not water soluble to float within the water-based bloodstream. And so we use these to transport cholesterol and triglycerides throughout the entire bloodstream to take it to the cells that need it. Specifically, LDL is usually leaving fat stores to go to other cells that need it, whereas HDL is taking those from the cells back into the liver. And as we've talked about again on a previous video, the liver is also really important for creating bile acid, which uses that cholesterol. And you can actually lower your cholesterol and fat content through this reverse transport cholesterol system that takes HDL back to the liver, turns it into bile acid, and then it can excrete it if it's bound to fiber within your diet. Now, the important point here is that the liver can export its fat into cholesterol, into LDL cholesterol, into the bloodstream for use by other cells. But a lot of people don't actually realize that adipose tissue can also export triglycerides into the LDL protein to be transported throughout the system. Now, lipolysis creates free fatty acids. It breaks the triglyceride molecule, which is a glycerol backbone with 3 fatty acids on it, breaks it down, breaks those fatty acids off, so this free fatty acid is now floating in the bloodstream. What the low-density lipoproteins do is that it takes the entire triglyceride molecule and packages it in that bubble of proteins. And that allows it to take it to different cells for the use as it needs to. And if we can export the adipose tissue into LDL cholesterol, then we can start to use it for our cells in structural ways that are not burning it for energy. And this is super important because from this higher view, it becomes very clear. Carbohydrates are supposed to be used for fuel. They are the high octane molecule that is not used for structural purposes. It's the only reason we have carbohydrate is for fuel. Protein and fat can be used as fuel, but they are much more important used as structural components. So if you think about having a house, well, if you have gasoline that you can use to heat or oil to use to heat the house, that's great. But when you start to run out of oil, well, you could start taking the doors down and you could start burning the shelves and things like that to keep the house warm. You're degrading the quality of the house, and eventually the heat's going to start to dissipate more quickly because there's holes in the walls and things like that. But this model of thinking helps you realize that the protein and the fat are structural components that you don't want to burn, but you can in times of stress. So the way that most of these lower carb diets or diets that try to burn fat through adrenaline and the catecholamines, most of the way that they would say to work is to rip off the doors and rip off the sidings of the house in order to burn it, but then just eat more siding in the house to put more siding back up. And that's not really the most efficient way. We can just burn carbohydrates to do that, and then any excess material that we have on the house, we can start to use to replace any weak spots within the house and then excrete the rest of them through the liver. So the way that we're starting to understand this is that through the action of thyroid hormone, which combines with LDL and vitamin A, we can use that LDL cholesterol that's exported from adipose tissue to create steroid hormones, to create cell membranes, to create anything else that the body needs that is the structural component of that fat. This is how we really start to understand how thyroid hormone works and start to understand how thyroid can lead to weight loss, why having a good thyroid health is so good for weight loss, and yet how fat burning is not in alignment with the action of thyroid hormone, which increases the respiration of carbohydrate. It starts to make sense that we're now putting our body in a state where it knows that times are abundant, it knows that things are okay, its battery is fully charged, and because of that, it can use the fat for structural reasons rather than holding tight onto it because it thinks it might need it for fuel at some point in the future. But you have to do this long enough to signal to your body and let your body know it's okay. You can use this for structural reasons. You don't need to hold on to it for that burning of the fat energy. Now, what does all of this mean on the practical level? Very basically, it means that you want to reduce your stress as much as possible while you're recovering your metabolism. And you want to be consuming plenty of carbohydrates, you want to be consuming adequate protein, and you want to keep fat much more on the lower end of things. In addition to that, you really want to make sure that you're consuming mostly saturated fats and monounsaturated fats, and very much avoiding the polyunsaturated fats. A good friend of mine uses the term that polyunsaturated fats are like using boards in the house that are full of termites. They still are boards, they still get the job done, but they're not the strongest thing you could have, and they're definitely not the highest quality thing you could have. And they're also very likely to degrade and end up hurting the structure of the house, which is exactly what polyunsaturated fats do too. So if you can start out with a diet like this, high carbohydrate, medium protein, low fat, and definitely avoiding the polyunsaturated fats, then you're going to start noticing that you're consuming more air, you're breathing a little deeper. You're going to notice that you can drink more water because your body is hotter and the sweat is evaporating more. You're going to feel more relaxed while you do this. And over time, you're going to notice that you're actually able to lose fat very quickly, especially if you do it in the right way, using things like low intensity walking, which helps your muscles use the fat for fuel, which they are more adapted to do, especially if you're using muscle building activities to ramp that up even further, things like weightlifting. If you're sleeping well, if you're keeping your stress low, and basically all the things that we talk about on this channel. So I'm going to definitely go further into weight loss in future videos, but I want to leave this one here because there's a lot of information that we covered. So if you guys have any questions, please leave comments below. Let me know. I want to answer them. Let me know any other topics specifically about weight loss or about anything that you want me to talk about. I really want to dive into this and clear a bunch of the confusion up, but also explore on the deeper levels of how all this can be done and how we can actually amplify our bodies, amplify our vitality to these higher levels, so that we can now live that better life and we can really start to optimize the functioning of the human body and reach these new heights. I am very interested in this, not only from the healing aspect, but also from the optimization aspect to become as superhuman as we can, if you want to think about it that way. So please like this video if you enjoyed it and subscribe for all these future videos that I'm talking about. I really want to build this channel up, and with your support, I can definitely do that. Please share it with anyone who might be interested in this. Weight loss isn't necessarily talked a lot about in the bioenergetic community, so I think there's a lot of good potential here that we can explore some new ground and come to some new conclusions. Having said that, I also have a Patreon account in my About section of this page. If you would like to go over there and throw me a few bucks, I would much appreciate it. Of course, no obligation to do so. And with all of that, I hope you guys got a lot out of this video. I want to talk again real soon more about this, and I'll be in the comments to talk to you in there as well. All right, guys, have a good one. Peace.